And we are recording. All right, so thank you again for joining us this evening for tonight's Earth Day at Home webinar. We'll be talking about creating wildlife habitat at home. Our speaker tonight is Kathleen Kerwin. I'll give you guys a brief introduction in just a second. But we wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to come out this evening and join us and travel virtually to our webinar series for celebrating and participating in Earth Day at Home. Our goal for these series of talks is to provide you guys with information that you can do at home, since we're all kind of stuck in our houses due to the current situation. But the whole idea of Earth Day is that you're supposed to think globally and act locally. And since we're all at home, that's the most local we can get. So here are some ideas that we can do on a variety of topics to help us at home. Past couple of weeks, we talked about soil health and soil compaction. And last week, we spoke about having a earth-friendly yard. And this week, we'll be talking about ways that you can attract wildlife to your home. I'm really good at attracting deer to my house with the landscaping I have, so hopefully I'll learn something tonight with you guys as well. We are working with Cooperative Extension. We all work in Cooperative Extension. My name is Steve Yarjo. I'm the county agent for Ocean and Atlantic counties, where we do a lot of work on water resource protection and coastal water quality. But Rutgers Cooperative Extension is part of Rutgers University, and we are the outreach arm of the university. The way I describe it is we take everything that's learned and studied and researched at the university, and we bring it out to basically everybody else besides the students who go to the university. So I tell people that we educate people who don't pay the tuition to go to the Rutgers University. So we bring what's learned and studied at the university out to the people in the quote-unquote real world, so they can do practical applied things in their everyday life and really use this science-based knowledge to help improve the quality of people's lives in the counties we're working or throughout all of New Jersey. So that's really what Cooperative Extension is all about. So as I mentioned before, this webinar series is really to give you guys some tools and some tricks that you can use at home on the variety of topics to, improve the quality of habitat for wildlife, or improve water quality or composting, etc. I mentioned before on how to use the chat box. Make sure that you send out to all the panelists so that we can see your questions. Since you guys are all muted, we can't hear you ask the question, so you actually have to put it in the chat box. I will be moderating the session for the speaker so that she can continue with the presentation. I'll interrupt with questions from you guys. So feel free to, don't be shy and get us your questions so we can get it answered and move forward from there. At the end of the talk, we will be doing a quick poll, which is basically just asking you guys a couple of questions about what you thought about the presentation, what you actually learned, and what you hope to be able to do yourself in terms of creating wildlife habitat at home. So we'll start that about 10 minutes or so before the class ends, and we'll get you guys answering that as Kathleen is wrapping up her presentation, excuse me. So one of the things is, even though we are providing this webinar series for free for 11 weeks, we are also working with Cooperative Extension and also the Environmental Stewards Program. And these sessions are free, but we do ask that you please give a donation if you're able to our programs, especially Rutgers Environmental Stewards. Any amount would be appreciated. What I will do is I will put in the chat a link to a place where you can actually donate online if you're able to. The funding that we're asking for, if you want to give us a donation, helps to support our extension volunteer efforts, including internships, scholarships, supplies for programs, so that we can get more people involved in helping to bring Earth Day to home every single day. What we ask is that you please put Earth Day in the notes, and like I said, I will send this out via the chat as well, so you have all the information wrapped up there. So that's kind of the bookkeeping and the housekeeping portion of my talk. So we will get started with having our speaker, Kathleen Kerwin, get started. Kathleen is with Cooperative Extension as well. She's a program associate, and she works in the Wildlife Conservation and Management Program, and she's been there since 2015. She joined them to help them develop and deliver extension education programming, do some program management, and deliver a lot of the services that we do related to wildlife management. And she's got a strong background in wildlife monitoring and management, and that's why we have her speaking to you guys tonight to talk about bringing wildlife to your home. So with that, thank you so much, Kathleen, for doing this, and you are good to go and get started.
All right, thank you, Steve. Thanks, everyone, for having me. we're going to go over some ways that you can make your yard more friendly for wildlife. And when I talk about wildlife, I'm referring to basically all of the living things that you can find out in New Jersey. There will be some focus particularly on birds and also insects like pollinators. Let's get started. So first off, I just wanted to brag for a little bit about New Jersey and how great it is. Sorry if there's any out-of-staters listening in. You are all great as well, but New Jersey is pretty unique in the sense that we have a very wide diversity of wildlife. And the reason for that is because even though we're such a small state in terms of land area, we have a wide variety of habitats. So if you start out in the northwest corner of the state, you're going to be in the Appalachian Mountains. And as you go down through the Piedmont coast and hit salt marshes and the ocean, you can track the pine barrens, which is a very unique habitat, and end up in Cape May, all within about a 5-hour drive. So that's pretty amazing. So we have a lot of different wildlife and plant species in our little state. But unfortunately, like most places in the world, we're under some major stress. So a lot of our wildlife is threatened by habitat loss, climate change, invasive species, and also pollution. And a lot of these issues can seem very big and scary and seem like there's not much you can do about it. But I'm here to tell you and try and convince you that you can do something about it. And we are going to be focusing more on habitat loss and how you can create habitat right in your own yard. So again, habitat loss is the #1 threat that New Jersey's wildlife faces. And habitat loss can lead to species declines and eventually species extinction. It can lead to fragmentation and also edge effects. So if we look at this top picture that I have here, this could be a typical suburban neighborhood in New Jersey. And it's probably safe to assume that before this neighborhood went in, this was probably a big continuous tract of forest. And when that development went in, that forest then got fragmented up. So in general, species do better when there's big, large spaces of space like that. When they're fragmented like this, you can see how there's just slivers of forest remaining, or maybe a little island over there, so it's not connected anymore. You're also increasing the amount of edge when you do this. So when you have more edge, and you can see like any edge where the forest is beating that mowed lawn or that development, you're then making that fragment more susceptible to other issues that I mentioned before, like pollution and climate change and invasive species. So it's not good. But backyard habitat can really help and can really make a difference. It can create refugia, so places for wildlife to take refuge in, maybe as they're trying to get from one habitat patch to the next. It can create corridors, so again, trying to connect these habitats together, maybe one larger piece of forest to the next, and then resources, which I'm going to talk about next. So all living things, all animals out there need 4 basic things: food, water, cover from bad weather, from predators, from people, and also places to raise young. So I am going to now go into ways that you can provide these in your yard. So maybe it's a good time for questions, if there isn't any yet, or I could keep going.
None yet, Kathleen.
Okay, no problem, cool. All right, so, oops, sorry, skipping ahead. So #1, I want to talk about mowed lawn. If you can reduce the amount of mowed lawn on your property, you can create a lot of benefits for wildlife, because unfortunately lawn supports very low levels of biodiversity. Lawn is essentially a single species of grass that's not native to New Jersey, and not only that, but it requires huge amounts of input. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that about 1/3 of all public water is used to grow grass in this country. And Americans use about 10 times more fertilizer on lawns per acre than we do on food crops. So they just require huge amounts of input, whether that's fertilizer and water, but also pesticides, the amount of time you have to spend mowing, the amount of gas that you need to spend with mowing them and weed whacking and everything else. And you're either doing that yourself or you're paying someone else to do it. Either way, it can be very, very expensive. On the same hand, lawns are part of our cultural identity. As Americans, we like lawns. We recreate on them, we barbecue, we teach our kids how to play sports and cartwheel and everything like that. So we're not saying that you should get rid of all lawn. It does serve a purpose. But the point here is that we need to start looking to reduce the amount of mowed lawn that we have. So here's an example of a backyard where they did keep some lawn, but you can see that there's a nice meadow habitat that was put in on the edge here. So this is just one example of what it could look like. And then another example, you might be thinking, well, I have a very small space in my backyard. I can't help wildlife that much. And that's not true. Even if you have a very small space, like in this example, this person put in nice stones to kind of delineate that section of mowed lawn versus natural area, and then installed some native grasses and wildflowers. And in about 3 years, they have what you see on the right. So this is the same yard. You can see the garage in the background is the same. They put a rain barrel, and now this is really great habitat, and it's not that big of a space. My next point is going to be about what types of plants that you want to be putting in. If you are going to reduce the amount of mowed lawn, what should you replace it with? So native plants are huge. There's 3 points I'm going to go over on why they're so important. And number one is that native plants are adapted to survive in their local climate. Native plants are species that evolved to live in that certain location. So in our case, New Jersey. And what makes that so great is, unlike the lawn, which requires so much input, so much water, so much pesticide, so much fertilizer, native plants don't really need that. I mean, they're going to need some care, especially the first year or two that you put them in, and they're going to need some watering, but they, by far, are going to be more adapted to survive, especially extreme conditions, like, say, there's a drought or anything like that. They're just built to survive those situations. So what that means is less watering, less fertilizing. That's more time and money for you. So it's actually less expensive to take care of native plants. My second point about native plants is that, and I'm going to really hammer this home, but native plants have evolved for millennia with native insects. And native insects are the primary food source for a lot of wildlife. They basically form the bottom of the food chain for most wildlife. For example, 96% of terrestrial birds rely solely on insects to survive. And this is especially true during the breeding season when they are raising young. So in this example, a chickadee, which you can see here, needs 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars just to raise one clutch of young. And you'll notice that they're not relying on bird seed, they're relying on insects. And in order to get insects, we need these native plants. Most people are probably familiar with the relationship between a monarch butterfly and milkweed, and the fact that monarchs absolutely need and they require milkweeds to lay their eggs in order for the caterpillars to survive. So I just wanted to give another example of that. And this is called the spicebush swallowtail. It's another butterfly, which you can see on the bottom left. But when it's caterpillar here, it requires plants in the laurel family, more specifically spicebush or sassafras, which is a nice native tree. Spicebush is a bush. But in a lab setting, when the eggs of this butterfly were placed on any other plant besides those specific plants, they starved and they died. And the reason for this is 90% of the insects that eat plants can only develop and reproduce on the plants for which they share an evolutionary history. So there's serious connections here that we just need to help along. Here's another example, just looking at native versus non-native ornamental plants. So a study was done looking at the caterpillar loads on these plants. So looking at the number of species that these plants can support. On the left, you have native plants, so oaks, cherries. A lot of these you can find in suburban neighborhoods. And they support a ton of caterpillars. Oaks are by far the best with over 550 species. Cherries are good too, over 450. And just by comparison, if you look at two ornamental plants that are not native, so these are both from Asia, the ginkgo and Japanese Okova tree. These are very, very common street trees, and they support basically no caterpillars. And when I say caterpillar or insect, I meant to mention this earlier, I'm not talking about pest species or anything that you wouldn't want around. These are just native insects that you probably wouldn't even notice, but they acquire these native plants. It's essentially like a bird going to a tree or going to the grocery store and finding that all the shelves are empty. And that's exactly what we all experienced probably with the last few weeks with everything going on. So it's not good. My third point about native plants and why they're so great is that the fruit from native plants will ripen at peak migration times. So when birds need the nutrients the most, especially before the breeding season when they just got back from migration, or after the breeding season when they have to fatten up, or for the birds that are staying all winter, they need some high energy content. So a lot of our native plants are built for that. These are just some examples. And there's going to be another webinar in the next few weeks. I believe it's called Plant This, Not That. That will go over more specific plants that you can put in your yard. But these are just some examples: elderberry, blueberry, oak trees, holly trees, walnuts, dogwoods. These are all really great for wildlife.
Kathleen, if I could just interrupt with a question or two. We've been getting a couple of questions for you.
Sure, let's go.
Okay, one of the questions that somebody asked was about just basically, instead of putting in new plants, if you just stop mowing parts of your lawn and then not treat that with herbicides or fertilizers, would that be something that would eventually grow up into something that could help wildlife?
Good question. I think, yes, it would definitely help provide some cover, which we'll talk about next. And it's good for the fact that you're not mowing it anymore and you're not fertilizing it and watering it. But in terms of providing native insects and that sort of thing, it won't help with that as much as native plants.
Okay. And somebody else asked about, I don't know about how knowledgeable you are about the plant species themselves, but somebody wanted to know if there was a good native ground cover that could withstand people walking on it back and forth, so like active parts of your yard.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know off the top of my head, but I think that if there's a part of your yard that you know you're going to be walking around a lot on, that's a perfect place for just the lawn, like the place where you're going to keep a portion of your lawn, because it's built to be walked on. That's basically what it's for. So I would say if that's a place where you know you're going to be walking a lot, just keep the lawn and pick another spot where you can put a native plant.
Okay.
But if there might be a species for that, I'd have to look into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the questions that somebody asked was, what is the deer resistance of some of these plants?
Another great question. So there are lists out there, if you look them up online, that can help you determine what plants are more resistant to deer than others. And unfortunately, if the deer population is high, which it is, some places more than others, and deer are hungry, they are going to eat literally anything. So there are some plants are more resistant than others, and I do have some resources that will be emailed out at the end of this talk where you can look up native plants and filter for that sort of thing. But yeah, unfortunately, the only way to prevent deer is through exclusion, either through a really tall fence or just protecting certain plants, because they will eat everything.
All right, thank you, Kathleen.
No problem. So you might be thinking, well, where do I buy native plants? And unfortunately, it's not that easy. A lot of our big box stores and big garden centers, they're not selling native plants. They're selling a lot of ornamental plants that evolved either in Europe or Asia. And if you look at this picture on the left, I mean, this is kind of the scene that we're used to, walking down the street, and you might not know what all the species are, but I mean, English ivy is everywhere. It grows in a lot of suburbs. Japanese maple are very common trees to put in your front yard. Hostas, azaleas, a lot of these are just they're not native, and so they're just not providing the food source that our wildlife needs. If you think back to that chickadee, a chickadee could not survive here. If it needs 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars just to raise one clutch of young, it just couldn't do it. It would starve, or its babies would starve. So you're not going to find those types of birds here. You're going to see more like robins, which are eating the worms out of the grass, but not those other species that require the insects. There are two places you can look. The Native Plant Society of New Jersey and Jersey Friendly Yards, they've both compiled lists of nurseries and stores that do sell native plants. Some of them are only wholesalers, so you can't just go buy a few plants, but some of them are retail stores where you can buy just a few plants. So you can start there, and I included these websites on the resource fact sheet that will get emailed after the talk. I'm not going to talk about this too much because, again, there's another webinar about invasive species, but I do want to just give one example to really hammer home why some of these non-natives are very, very bad for the environment. In some cases, like a Japanese maple, they're not going to escape your yard. That one tree is probably just going to stay there, and it's not going to spread to the surrounding environment. But some of them do, and one of them is called Japanese barberry. This is an extremely common landscaped plant that you can find across the country. It's been here for over 100 years. It's usually purple, but it can also be green. So it's this purple plant in the bottom left picture in the landscaped yard. And the issue is that it produces these red berries, which birds will readily eat and then poop out the seeds in the surrounding landscape. And this plant is very, very good at surviving and forming very dense colonies, especially in the understory of our forests. And what it does is that it's one of the first plants to leaf out, meaning it forms leaves. So in this bottom right picture, you can see, before any of the trees have leaves on it, the Japanese barberry already has leaves. And this can block sunlight from hitting our spring ephemerals, which are flowers that live on the forest floor. And the way that they survive is by coming up early in spring before the trees have leaves, and they're able to complete their flowering cycle before they get shaded out. So now the Japanese barberry is shading them out. This plant has very sharp spines, so the deer do not like it, and that's one of the reasons people plant it, is because it's deer resistant. But unfortunately, it's also deer resistant in these more natural settings. And so then the deer are eating all of our native plants. It also has a fine diffusive root system, so it's very good at absorbing nutrients, and it also puts out a chemical in the soil which will prevent other species from growing nearby. So it's just a very, very competitive plant, and a lot of the states around New Jersey have actually passed laws against Japanese barberry. You can't sell it or propagate it. New Jersey tried passing a law, and it didn't go through. So we really need to think about this and just be cognizant, because you can easily buy this plant in any of these big stores, so it's just everywhere.
Kathleen, just a quick question. Someone wanted to know if this plant was associated with ticks.
Yes, it is associated with ticks. I don't know the details about that, but yes, you're right. It is associated with ticks, which carry Lyme disease, so that's another reason not to like it.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Kathleen.
All right, so that was a little depressing. We'll talk more about providing water for wildlife. Some cute pictures here, but So that was my food spiel. So you'll notice I didn't even talk about bird feeders. You can put out bird feeders for hummingbirds, seed feeders for other birds, but really if you want to provide food for all wildlife, it's native plants. That's what we really need to be focusing on. But now onto water. So when providing water for wildlife, you can get very fancy depending on the space and resources that you have. You can put in a whole backyard pond, and that's amazing. But if you have a smaller space or you just want to do something on the less expensive side, just putting in a simple bird bath or even just a shallow water dish. There's a lot of pollinators like these butterflies, which will actually, in a natural setting, they'll drink out of shallow puddles. So you can kind of recreate that by putting out a shallow bowl like that, putting some rocks so that the butterflies have a perch to stand on, and then they can drink from the water. Or a simple bird bath. And I'm going to go over some details on how to care for a bird bath. Oh, and I also want to mention, if you have a pond like this, it's great habitat for frogs and toads that need to lay their eggs in water, but also dragonflies and damselflies and all sorts of things. So you can really create a lot of habitat with a pond like that. So bird bath care. Number one is that if you're going to put out a bird bath, try and be pretty consistent with keeping it full. Birds are not going to visit something that they're not confident there's going to be water in because it's just not worth their time. So just if you commit to the bird bath, just try and make sure it's full. If it's standing water, then make sure to change it every few days. You don't want mosquito larvae developing. You don't want algae developing. So just scrub it out every few days. You don't have to use a detergent or anything like that. And if you want to be fancy, you can put a water heater in the winter. Birds would appreciate it. You can also buy like bubblers or things that keep the water moving more frequently so that you don't have to worry about standing water. And just more on bird baths, providing water can really help attract some of the uncommon species, so types of warblers or vireos that you don't typically see in your backyard. Make sure if you do get a bird bath, you don't want something that just like becomes very deep very quickly. You want it to be a shallow, a gentle incline into the water and only be about 2 to 3 inches deep. I'm not going to dwell on cats too much, but I do want to say that outdoor cats, they do prey upon birds and other wildlife. So if you know that you have outdoor cats around, maybe feral cats, please keep your bird bath and your bird feeders in the open, at least 3 feet off the ground and 15 feet from shrubs. This just helps keep the birds safe from these predatory attacks. If you're pretty confident there's no cats around, try putting your bird bath in a more secretive, sheltered area. This will help attract some more secretive birds that don't like being out in the open like that. So again, warblers and things like wood thrushes. Yeah.
Kathleen, we have a bunch of questions about water sources in bird baths, if you don't mind taking a couple.
Sure.
A couple of people have asked about placement of the water feature. So if you have something, should you place it in the sun or the shade, or should you or elevate it so it's off the ground from predators?
When it comes to shade or sun, I'm not exactly sure. I would imagine that if it's in direct sun, maybe there'd be some algae issues or something like that. I'm not totally sure. I don't have a bird bath, or I don't have a pond like that, so I don't have any personal experiences with it. I would definitely Google and like do some more research on that, and I can do that myself and get back to you.
Okay.
And in terms of elevated, most I've seen are ground level, and that allows things like frogs and things to get in there. So I don't think you need to elevate it, but
okay.
And do more research.
Okay. And we had a couple of people ask about if their property was close to like a larger pond or another source of water, is it really important to have something on their own properties for the wildlife?
Not necessarily. Like if you live near a body of water, then that's probably what the wildlife are using.
Okay.
But if you want to, and another thing with bird feeders, bird feeders are great and bird baths are great for being able to see wildlife. So getting those birds in an area of your yard that you can see them out your window. So that would be a reason to put one in, just so that you can enjoy watching them. But if you have, you know, a pond next door, then that's probably what they're going to be using.
Okay. And the last question I'll ask you has to do with mosquitoes. And people were asking about, I know in rain barrel programs, we've talked about the use of mosquito dunks that you can get at the big box store. Would you recommend those being used in bird baths and water sources?
What is that exactly?
So it looks like around a donut, and you put it in, and it releases, I'm assuming, some sort of chemical that prevents the mosquitoes from being able to breed in that water.
I'd imagine that's not recommended, just because the wildlife are going to be drinking that water, and you don't want any sort of chemical release.
It may be something biological to it, maybe like a fungus or something like that.
Yeah. So I would try to avoid that. Either keep the water moving or just commit to dumping it out and scrubbing it every few days, which could be annoying. But.
Okay. Thank you, Kathleen.
Yep. All right, so next, moving away from water, we're going to talk about how you can provide cover, but also places to raise young for wildlife. And a lot of times, these two things can be accomplished by doing the same thing. So we're going to talk first about building a brush pile, and there is a fact sheet, a Rutgers fact sheet about doing this, and it provides a lot of details. So that's going to be part of the resource list that gets sent out. But basically, what you're looking for is when you're building a brush pile, which can provide habitat for all sorts of wildlife, especially birds and small mammals, you want to start with a supporting base. So you can use either logs, like shown in this diagram, or stones. And you want to arrange them so that they're crisscrossing, and that creates a lot of nook and crannies on the bottom of the base. And then from there, you can pile on smaller vegetation like sticks or even a Christmas tree. It's a great way to get your kids involved. You can put leaves and just kind of pile it up. You don't want to put these really close to your house, just because they are going to be harboring a lot of different species. I read somewhere that they can even be considered a fire hazard, but maybe near your garden, because there's going to be a lot of birds using that like to eat insects, so they could help with your pest control. Or if you live near the woods, you know, putting one kind of at the edge of the woods is really, really beneficial. For some reason, I cannot move forward. Yeah, the arrow is grayed out.
Ooh.
Technical difficulty here.
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah. Well, while you're on the brush pile, someone wanted to ask, will it attract mice as well?
It can. It can attract small mammals like mice and voles and things like that. So again, these might not be for everybody. If you don't want that type of animal near your house or anything, maybe don't do a brush pile. But they do provide really good cover for all sorts of different wildlife, even like frogs and salamanders and turtles. Steve, I don't see the rest of my slides here, so I don't know if I have to reload, or what do you think?
Why don't you give it a try to reload that, and maybe as you're doing that, waiting for that to come up, maybe there's another couple of questions that you can take at that point. Thanks to everybody who's sending out information on the mosquito dunks. Apparently they are safe for wildlife. Just looking for a confirmation on that.
Thank you.
So go ahead and try to reload your talk. So I don't know if this is getting ahead in your presentation, but somebody wants to know about what can you do if you have too many squirrels?
Yeah, they can be a pest species. With a lot of those, you're either trying to, I mean, the worst thing is if you get them in your house, then you have a real problem. But if you have too many, you can try calling a wildlife control person that maybe would be able to trap them and remove them. But they're hard. I mean, they're just everywhere. they're hard to, sorry, trying to see this. Now I can only see one slide.
At least you got to the 18 before.
Steve, maybe it would be better if she shares her screen.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to switch to sharing the screen, Kathleen.
Okay. Let me know how to do that.
You might have to share application. You might have to share PowerPoint. The same location where you shared the file.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for your patience. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Can you see the screen?
I can see it great there. I don't see the slide just yet.
I have the PowerPoint up.
For those of you who are participating, please make sure your mic is muted. Thank you.
Let's see. I think I put shares PowerPoint. Can you see anything on your end?
I can just see the top part that says the PowerPoint file edit view.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Kathleen, you're sharing the PowerPoint, not your browser or.
Yeah, I hit the share PowerPoint. Was that the right thing to do?
Yes, that should have been the right thing to do.
And it says I'm sharing. Let's see, share. Yep, share PowerPoint. View full screen.
Yeah, no, it's still dark, but.
Any idea?
No.
I could share my desktop.
Share. Yeah, maybe share your desktop.
Did that work?
I'm seeing something.
I do slideshow. Did that do anything?
I saw blinking. I didn't see anything else.
Hey, Steve,
Kathleen.
you may want to. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Amy. Go ahead.
I was just going to say maybe if Kathleen logs off and comes back on, that helps sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other option is for Steve to take over as and see if he can. He has option.
Yeah, and have her send the PowerPoint to me. So it's just the one, so I'm going to close that one. Once again, sorry about the technical difficulties for everybody.
Should I sign off? Or...
Yes.
Okay. Be right back.
Do you want to, Steve? Do you want to try taking over as presenter and see if you have more privileges?
Okay. Yeah. 1 second, Kathleen. I am now the presenter. I'm back being presenter, and it's still stopped at the 18th slide.
Okay.
Do you have a copy of her slides?
I do not.
Yeah. You would need to have.
Oh, well, Kathleen already logged off. She's going to come back on.
Okay.
Well, in the meantime, we can address some of these questions.
Yeah, lots of questions.
Lots of questions.
Questions, people.
Lots of questions about plants. We have a plant talk coming up in a couple of weeks. So.
We do. Hopefully, you'll all come back for the plant talk. There was a question about plants for wet spaces and wet spots. And the best thing to do with that, hopefully you saw my response, is when you go to like the Native Plant Society website, New Jersey Native Plant Society, or for example, Jersey Friendly Yards, you can look for the plants categorized with their wetland indicator status. And you want to look, if you're looking for plants for wet areas, you would look for facultative wetland plants or facultative plants. If you're looking for plants for drier areas, you would look for plants that say upland or facultative upland, and that means that you're more likely to find them in upland areas. I also saw another question about moss in the yards as an alternative to lawns. Moss is great and it's beautiful and it's soft, but it's not so great. It's not an equivalent to a lawn, unfortunately. It has that green look, but it doesn't necessarily stand up to traffic the way a lawn does.
And as I mentioned in the chat, there's the Jersey Friendly Yards website that Kathleen mentioned also has a plant database in it of native plants that you can customize to your own site's conditions, to your own yard's conditions, like if it's partly shade or very sunny, or if it is wet, or if it's drier, what kind of soils you have. So you can kind of pick and choose and create your own list of native plants that you can look into further purchasing for your yard.
Okay, I loaded the PowerPoint and it looks like I have all 36 slides now.
Okay.
Where were we? Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes. Thank you again, everyone, for your patience on that. We really appreciate it. All right, go ahead, Kathleen.
All right, so brush pile, I think we covered that. Okay, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is maximizing vegetation levels. So not just providing one type of habitat, but if you have the space for it, plant all different sizes of vegetation. So you can put your larger trees, like your conifers, more at the rear of your property, and that can help provide some sheltering from winter winds. You can put more shade-tolerant shrubs at the base of those trees, and then you're kind of creating these multi-level vegetation islands because especially different birds, they're going to be different areas, different levels of that vegetation. For example, we often think of birds, nesting high up in the trees, but it's not always the case. It's like this yellow warbler or even hummingbirds. You can often find them nesting in bushes within 10 feet of the ground. So it's really good to, when you're anything, make sure you offer some dense areas, so dense bushes that kind of create that nice sheltered area that they can make their nest. Moving on to dead flower stalks. So at the end of the growing season, if you have a meadow or somewhere with like more herbaceous things, you might be wondering what to do with the seed heads, and always leave them. They provide a little bit of a food source and also provide some texture in your garden for the winter time, and can provide some refuge during the winter from weather and predators. And then when you get to the springtime or very late winter, early spring, you can actually turn this into really great pollinator habitat. So if you cut those flower stalks back to about 50 inches, this is great for native bees. About 30% of our native bees actually nest above ground. And so they're looking for these little hollow spaces that they can find in something like a cut flower stalk to then excavate and lay an egg. Now switching to dead wood. So what you have here would be either snags or logs. Now snag is a dead tree that is left standing. So obviously in a lot of suburban or urban areas, you can't just leave a dead tree because it's a safety hazard. It could fall on your property or your house or someone else's structure. But if you do have the space, or maybe you do have a bit of a forested area on your property, please leave those snags in place. They provide really, really great habitat for all sorts of wildlife. As they start to decay, woodpeckers will come in and start feeding from all of the insects that have colonized the dead wood. They're used for perches for different bird species. And eventually, as they decompose, they're putting that nutrient back into the soil. If you can't have a snag, but maybe there's a big piece of the tree that falls down, just think about keeping that dead wood in place, because even if it's just laying on the ground, it's still providing a lot of these benefits. And as these woodpeckers and other animals are excavating, they create really great habitat for all sorts of species. So we do a lot of bat work with our program, so I had to include Indiana bat, which is a federally endangered species. Bats often can be found roosting in the day using dead trees under the bark that peels off a freshly dead tree. Woodpeckers, so this is a pileated woodpecker. It's the biggest woodpecker we have in New Jersey, and they create really big holes, which are often used after the woodpecker's done with them. They're used by many other species. Is an example of an owl, an eastern screech owl, which we have in New Jersey, and they will take advantage of older burrows or cavities. And then, of course, raccoons will also spend their days in this type of cavity. If you live on a property where you really can't have a snag, you can, fortunately, you can fake it by creating nest boxes for animals, which basically is just mimicking a more natural cavity that you'd find in a dead tree. So if you go to nestwatch.org, they provide the size and habitat requirements that a lot of species need. So, each species would require a different size cavity or a different size opening to try and prevent other things from coming in. So if you want to attract a certain thing like an owl or something smaller, you can go to that website and figure out what type of nest box to provide. But 86 species of North American birds nest in cavities, so that's a lot. These are just some common examples. But it's great to put nest boxes on your property. And similarly, you can create some bat habitat by putting up a bat house. So some of our bats are colony roosters, which means that the females will get together in the spring, and they all will have their babies at around the same time, which is in late spring, early summer. And if you put up a bat house, it mimics those tight vertical spaces that these bats would find in a more natural tree cavity. So some of the things to think about if you want to put up a bat house, they have to be about 15 feet or higher off the ground. They should face south, southeast, just to get some maximum sun exposure. And they should be free from obstruction within about 20 feet. So that includes tree limbs or power lines or anything like that. It's for two reasons. One is tree limbs can block the sun from hitting the bat house, and you really want it to be nice and warm. And also, predators like hawks and owls will eat bats, so they might not want to be somewhere where a hawk or owl could be perching. And if you're going to put a bat house on a structure, just make sure it's not too near doors or walkways, because of course bats poop a lot. Their poop is known as guano, so that's a picture of it on the bottom right. It's really great fertilizer, so if you could put a bat house over like a gardened area, that would be great, but you don't want to be walking in it every day. And we do run a bat house distribution program. So if anyone is interested in reaching out to me, we sell and install bat houses for a pretty reasonable fee. We really try and get people to put the bat house directly onto a structure. We actually did a study looking at all of the bat houses we've put up over the last few years, and overwhelmingly, the ones that were put onto structures were the ones that got used. We've put them on trees before and poles, and they're just not as attractive to the bats. We also run this program to help people that might have bats living inside of their attic or other space in their home. And the only way to get bats out is through an exclusion. So you get a wildlife control company to exclude the bats. They put up a one-way device so the bats can leave, they can't come back in. And we can put up a bat house so that once those bats are kicked out and they have nowhere else to go, they can move right into the bat house, and you don't have to lose the bats from your property, because they do eat a lot of bugs. They can eat their weight in insects every single summer night. So that's a lot of insects that they're removing from your property. Any questions on bat houses?
Well, there were a couple of questions, and a couple of them came in about the cutting down of the leaf stalk, of the flower stalks.
Mm-hmm.
And people just want to know when should they do that?
I think like late spring, late winter, so March, I think would be a good time.
Mm-hmm.
So winter is basically over, but you're gearing up for spring. March, early April, that's where I saw that posted about doing that activity.
And somebody asked, are there any problems when you're putting a bat house on your home on the outside walls? Are there any potential problems that you could have?
Good question. So the way that we mount the bat houses is just through 4 screws, and it's just going right into the siding. So it's just 4 like typical screw holes, and we haven't had any issues with that in the past. And they are, removable. Like if you're selling your house and you don't want that bat house there anymore, they're pretty easy to take off. So they don't really cause much issue.
Okay. And someone was asking about if there was an affinity for bats in ash trees, and what would the impact of losing the ash trees to, say, something like the emerald ash borer or other diseases would have on the bats?
That's interesting. So last summer we tracked northern long-eared bats, which are a federally threatened species. They've been really impacted by white nose syndrome, which is a disease that our bats have. And we tracked it. We had an adult male that we radio tracked to a dead ash snag in the eco-preserve in Piscataway. So, dead trees are good for bats, but they're eventually they do break down. So it's kind of like a temporary habitat gain that these ash trees are dying. They're providing this bat habitat, but overall, it's not good for anything that we're losing all these ash trees. That makes sense.
Okay. And somebody just wanted to ask about the diet of bats. Like, do they prefer to eat just flying insects, or do they eat other insects as well?
They do mostly eat flying insects. Some bats, it's called gleaning, where they actually fly up to vegetation and they'll take an insect off vegetation. But for the most part, they're eating flying insects. And from the studies that we've looked at, they're not picky. They're eating basically whatever's flying in front of them, and it's a huge general diet. It's beetles, moths, flies, like all types of insects that they can grab. They'll eat mosquitoes, and we always try and say that bats can eat a lot of mosquitoes, but it's not like they're preferring mosquitoes over other things. They're eating basically every flying insect that they can find at night.
Okay.
Good, how are you?
All right, thank you, Kathleen.
You're welcome.
Oh, wow, okay. hold?
So just some more general, just wildlife friendly and also sustainable landscaping tips that you can follow. So the arrangement of plantings is important. You want to group species together to enhance visibility. Things like hummingbirds are relying on sight to find habitat patches. So if you have different species that have different colored flowers, put those together, put those same species together so that it creates this nice popping color so that wildlife can find it. It also helps with connectivity. So if you're planting things pretty dense, it just creates a nice connected habitat. And it can help reduce weeds if you're putting things pretty close together. And pick a variety of species that will bloom all year. So not just things that will bloom in July, but things that will bloom from the spring into the fall. And that way you'll have color and resources for pollinators and birds all year round. Not all year, all growing season. Leave the leaves. So leaves are really important, especially for things like salamanders and chipmunks and box turtles and toads. A lot of these, and even butterflies and moths, they rely on this leaf layer of leaves to find food and also overwinter. And so instead of raking them and putting them into a landfill, there's lots of things you can do with them. You can leave them right where they fall and maybe mow them up a little bit to add some nutrients to your lawn. If you can't do that because you're just not able to, or maybe you're in like an HOA or something that doesn't allow just leaves everywhere, you can rake them and use them in your garden as mulch. It's like a free source of mulch. You can add it to compost piles, and you can also use them for your brush piles that we talked about earlier. So there's lots of things you can do with leaves. Rain barrels, so this isn't really related to wildlife, but this is great, great idea for just making use of the water that's hitting your roof. You can actually capture it into these big big barrels that are about 50 gallons, 50 to 55 gallons. And this is water that you can use for flower bed shrubs, trees, washing tools, and that way you're not tapping into the drinking water system. And it's also preventing all that water that would be going into the sewer system from going there. You're repurposing it for your lawn, or sorry, for your property. We're almost done here. So compost, there's going to be another webinar coming up. I highly recommend you guys check it out. That's going to talk all about composting. So this is just really quick. This is a great way to provide yourself a free fertilizer by putting your kitchen scraps, grass clippings, as well as those leaves and grass and straw into a container or just simply a pile in your yard. In a few months, you can have really, really great fertilizer. And it's really natural, and it just helps put nutrients back into the soil.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second, Kathleen, and just let everyone know that I'm going to open up the poll now. And after you're done filling it out, please make sure that you click on Submit to submit your answers. Otherwise, we won't get you the information from you. So I'm going to open up the poll for about 15 minutes. Find the poll. All right, keep on going, Kathleen.
Okay, sure. And this is about involving children. So involve your kids in the design, the care, and the enjoyment of all of these things. It's all about making connections and connecting action with results. So, you know, monarch, butterflies, and planting milkweed, that's like a great way to start. You know, have your child help you plant a few milkweeds and make a patch of monarch butterfly habitat and explain why it's so important to do that and how it's creating homes for these butterflies that otherwise wouldn't survive or wouldn't be able to reproduce. And then hopefully you see some monarchs come and see some caterpillars and really make a connection for them. So you might be feeling overwhelmed because there's a lot of different types of things that you can do. But just to start, it would be great to create a map of your property and then just go from there. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It could just be a drawing of all the structures on your property, all the existing vegetation, And then figure out maybe what you want to do. If there's Japanese barberry that you didn't realize was bad, plan on taking it out and replacing it with something native. You don't have to rip down every non-native thing that you have. Just start small. Plant something native. Put in a bird bath. Just try and provide these 4 things that wildlife needs: food, water, cover, and a place to raise young. And I was recently looking at a Facebook Live event from John Rowden from the National Audubon Society, and I liked what he said at the end. It was progress, not perfection. We're not looking for everyone to just rip everything apart and start from scratch. It's just making these very small steps can really, really make a difference for all sorts of critters. And then this is my last slide, but just to drive home the point that nature does not need to be a far-off exotic place that you can't do anything to save. It can exist right in your backyard, and you really, really can make even a small area, even if it's a small spot, you can make it very wildlife friendly. And we need to kind of rethink everything. We need to redesign our home and our business landscapes to support this local biodiversity, because right now the landscaping that goes in is really not friendly for wildlife. And you can directly help restore these populations. Let's start bringing nature into our daily lives and making that connection. Here is my contact info. We do have a Facebook page. I hope that everyone goes on and finds us. If you just type in Rutgers Wildlife into the search bar, please give us a like. We put a lot of tips out there. We talk about the research that we do. We share all sorts of stuff, so please find us. And here is my email and our website as well. But this will also be on a list of resources that gets sent out to everybody that is participating. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. I'm sure there's virtual clapping going on now as people are wrapping up the poll. We do have a few questions if you have a few minutes that we could follow up on.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Someone asked about deer repellents and what impact they would have if you were to spray them on your plants on like hummingbirds, bees, butterflies, other pollinators.
That's a good question. As long as it's a natural thing, I don't think it would be an issue. Like a lot of times, like I know we're working on a groundhog fact sheet, and we talk about using like capsaicin, that spicy stuff that you would that would make your mouth hot if you ate a pepper. I don't think that would be an issue, but honestly, repellents don't seem to be that useful. I guess it depends on the situation, but like I said before, if there's a lot of deer and they know there's a food source in your yard, you could spray it. You probably have to spray it pretty often because water's going to wash it off, the rain's going to wash it off. These animals will take what they want unless they're excluded in some way. But I don't think there'd be any issue with pollinators with most of those products, but it would depend on the product.
Okay. Thanks, Kathleen. We did have a couple of questions about when you mentioned about leaving the leaves on your yard. Mm-hmm. Some people wanted to know if it was safe to remove them, say in the spring, if they were still around, or if you actually mulch them back into your yard using a cutter, what kind of impact that both of those kind of management strategies would have on any of the insects that are trying to grow in there.
Yeah, so that would depend. I mean, I think if it's more of like a lawn area and you are keeping you decide to keep the leaves, I would cut them up like in the fall, so it's just so it's not really like creating a layer of leaves. It's just that you're mulching them up in the fall, and then they have time to break down. But if you have a space in your yard where you're pushing the leaves and or creating a layer of leaves, I probably wouldn't mulch them up in the spring because there are going to be a lot of insects in there, and you're not, it's impossible to know exactly what might be under there, what took advantage of it. So I would kind of like delineate those two areas, like one where you can mulch and it's maybe an area that you're walking around more, and then the more of that natural area where you just leave it.
Okay. And we've got a question on hummingbirds. People are interested in having hummingbirds come to their property. If you have any recommendations for any sort of plants that would be good for hummingbirds, or any information on how to locate a hummingbird feeder.
I'm very happy you asked. We just came out with a brand new hummingbird fact sheet, so that's also going to be in the resource list, but there is an extensive list of native plants that hummingbirds absolutely love, so you can take a look at that. And there is a lot of information on feeders. So, you know, you can usually find hummingbird feeders at like a local bird store, nature store, or online. The biggest thing is don't add red food coloring to the sugar water that you're giving them. It's not necessary. They're attracted to the red parts of the feeder itself, not the color of the sugar water. Another thing to know with hummingbird feeders is, especially during the really hot weather, like summertime, just be careful because that's sugar water and it can ferment and actually create alcohol and injure the hummingbird. So you want to be really careful about that. Change them frequently, or just put them out in the spring or the fall when the hummingbirds are coming back from migration or leaving for migration, because they have such big energy needs. But the best thing in the summer is just to have native plants. Did I answer everything?
Yeah, and like we said, there will be a list of resources that come out after this that will give you more information. So, but we do have someone who's highly interested in cultivars of native plants and wants to know if they're beneficial to insects as the true native plants are.
That's tricky. So yeah, in general, you want the genetics of the plant to match your local conditions, but that can be hard to find. I mean, it's hard enough finding, you know, native plants in general. So if all you can find is a cultivar of one of the native plants, I imagine that's better than non-native, but we're always trying to find the ones that are, you know, most adapted to our landscapes. But yeah, that's tricky.
All right, and then besides deer, the other pesky critter that we deal with in New Jersey with our landscaping stuff are groundhogs.
Yeah.
So any recommendations for what to do about excluding groundhogs?
Yes, we are currently working on a groundhog fact sheet, so that'll be out soon. Keep an eye out. And again, it's kind of like deer. The best way is to exclude them. So if you have a really high valued area, like a vegetable garden, or maybe just a planted area that you don't want them in, the best thing is to put up either a fence or an electric fence, like a few wires. And with the fence, like if you're putting up chicken wire or something like that, it doesn't have to be that tall, but they can climb. So, I think 3 to 4 feet, but that top, like 12 inches, have it not attached to the posts in the ground so that it's kind of wobbly. And that way, when the groundhog gets to the top of the fence, it just falls back. It can't actually get over. And the same thing is that they can dig. So when you're putting in that fence, you have to kind of dig out about a foot deep and put in the fencing material and kind of like an L shape, so that when they dig down, they're actually hitting fence material. They can't get under. Or it's really easy these days to go to a garden center and buy some electric wiring, if you're comfortable doing that, and just putting up a few strands of electric fence. If you do one strand about 4 inches off the ground and another at 8 inches, it's really good at deterring groundhogs. They just won't be able to get in.
Would that work for rabbits as well?
That fencing I described is good for like most animals. So rabbits, small stuff, like make sure you just pick chicken wire that has like really small openings, and you can keep out pets, cats, dogs. You can keep out mostly everything. Deer, unfortunately, they jump. You need a fence that's like 8 to 10 feet high, or an electric fence. But yeah, the groundhog fence I described is really good for all sorts of wildlife, keeping them out.
And there are a bunch of people who are interested in the Bat House program. You said there's a small fee. Could you just mention what that fee is?
Sure. We charge $75 plus sales tax. I think it comes out to about $79, and that includes the Bat House and the installation if it's on a structure. If you want the Bat House on a post, it costs more. I believe it's under $200. I don't have the exact number in my head, but that requires a lot more materials and work, because we have to dig about a 4-foot deep hole, and we get a 16-foot wooden post, which we have to put it in put the post into the hole, and then do bags of quick drying concrete mix to secure it. So that's a lot more work. But yeah, we definitely try and convince people to put these houses on structures. It just seems to be a lot more successful when we do it that way.
Okay. And somebody was interested in attracting the state bird of New Jersey, the goldfinch.
Yes.
So if you had any recommendations for that?
I think that they like a certain type of seed. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you look it up online, there's a lot of information about that. They like certain types of seeds, but they are a great bird, and good luck.
I'm just rolling through the questions. A lot of questions dealing with plants and whether or not they should let ivy grow, etc.
Like poison ivy?
English ivy.
Oh, no. I would recommend removing it. It's not native. It can be kind of invasive as well. So I would definitely recommend removing English ivy.
Okay. Okay. I think that's been the majority of the questions, Kathleen.
Cool. I see someone answered Black-eyed Susan, or other flowers. Those are good for goldfinches.
Yep.
Oh, Niger seeds. That's what I was thinking of for finches. Niger seeds.
Yep. Blazing star, monarda plants, sunflowers. Okay. And coneflowers as well. Did have one question on pedestal bird feeders. I think they were looking as to whether or not a pedestal was better than a one that was on the ground.
Yeah, it depends on the predator situation. So if you know that there's an outdoor cat colony hanging around, I would definitely not put the bird bath on the ground. But if you think that there's not a lot of cats around, then you can try and put it on the ground. But it just makes them more vulnerable. It makes the bird more vulnerable to like a sneak attack that they're not prepared to handle.
Okay. And someone did ask if there was a way to prevent woodpeckers from pecking into their house.
Yeah, it's really tough. You can try putting up that mylar strips you've seen maybe at like airports where they're trying to prevent geese from landing in certain areas, like that flashy tape. You could try playing like music. Like they're tough, but there are some things you can do. If you actually go to our website, wildlife.rutgers.edu, we have a frequently asked wildlife questions page, and woodpeckers are on there. There should be more information there.
Okay. I think that's been the majority of the questions. So thank you again so much, Kathleen, for your wonderful talk tonight. Thanks to everybody for participating in this, as well as filling out the poll. I'm just going to check to see how much time we have left on the poll. We have just over a minute left on the poll, so if you haven't filled it out yet, we'll give you some time to finish that off. But thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I hope you learned a little bit about this program. We will be making the slides from Kathleen's talk, as well as a sheet on all the additional resources for finding out about native plants, more information on wildlife, et cetera. And once again, thank you for putting up with the minor technical difficulty and hanging with us. We do appreciate it. But please join us every Monday at 6:30 as part of the Earth Day at Home program webinar series. Please join us next week, and thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. So have a good night and stay safe out there, everybody. Ooh, we're losing participants now. So good job, Kathleen. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now. I think I'm going to stop the poll because we're almost at 6 seconds left of the poll. Close that.
Kathleen, that was great.
That was awesome.
That was very good. A lot of native plant questions.
Yeah, Michelle, did you hear that?
Yeah.
A lot of native plant questions.
I mean, yes.
The highest number I saw was 297.
Yeah.
I had 296, so thanks, Amy. So that's the highest number we've had so far, Kathleen, so great job.
Woo!
Yes,
Yeah.
even with the technical difficulties, thank you for rolling with that.
Yeah, that was a great talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry. I guess I didn't realize they didn't all load. I'm seeing now that you can see the amount of slides that loaded at the top. So sorry I didn't see that at the beginning.
That's okay. Maybe that's something that we'll add to our list of moderator that's our checklist. We kind of have a checklist. That's our that'll be on our moderator. Make sure all the slides load. That has happened to me before also.
Yeah, and then it was weird. The second time I loaded it, only one loaded, and then when I signed out and came back, tried again, they all loaded. So
the wonders of WebEx.